want to talk to you this morning about a man who lived about 1,500 years before Christ. And it's a man that there's no shortage of sermons about, and his name is Joseph. The story of Joseph is fantastic. He was the second youngest son of Jacob, the grandson of Isaac, and the great-grandson of Abraham. His mother was Rachel. This is the one that Jacob loved dearly, and she was unable to have children. And Joseph was born. Jacob was an old man, and Joseph became the favorite of his father Jacob. The first mention of Joseph is in Genesis 30, verses 22 to 24. Then God remembered Rachel's plight and answered her prayers by enabling her to have children. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. God has removed my disgrace, she said. And she named him Joseph, for she said, may the Lord add yet another son to my family. Joseph's name means God shall add. And he indeed did add, because he had one little brother, Benjamin, also born to Rachel, and Rachel died in childbirth, giving birth to Benjamin. So we catch up again with Joseph a little bit later on in Genesis 37. I'm going to encourage you, read this whole story for yourself. I'm going to do a synopsis. I'm going to kind of tell a story, but I'm not going to tell the whole story. But for focus, for what we want to focus on today, we're going to hit those high spots. But it's not a long read. Genesis 37, we find out that Joseph is 17 years old at that time, and he's serving his father Jacob, and he's tending the flocks with his older brothers. As I mentioned before, he was kind of the favored son of his father. He's received some special treatment. We might say he was spoiled. How many kids were spoiled here? Yeah, okay. Yeah, some of you have the courage to admit that you were spoiled, and some of you don't. But Joseph was a dreamer. Joseph was a dreamer and kind of an irritant to his brothers and even to his father. It could be that his youth caused him to let some things come out of his mouth that maybe he shouldn't have let come out of his mouth. But he definitely always seemed to have a dream. He was out working with his brothers, and he told them a story, and he said, you know, I had a dream that I was out working in the fields, and we were tying up bundles of grain, and my bundle stood up, and all of your bundles gathered around and bowed down to mine. Well, how many of you know that that's probably not the best way to win friends or influence people? And then he told another dream, and he said, I had this other dream, and the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bowed before me. Oh, wow. Okay, the dream had a purpose, but maybe some dreams just shouldn't be shared right away. Can't hear the inflection, but clearly that's a dream he should have kept to himself. There are times, and there is a time in your walk with the Lord that God may give you such a big dream that to even talk about it sounds ridiculous. To even let it come out of your mouth, you think, oh, people are going to think, what are they going to think of me? Well, maybe it's not time to share it. There are some things you just got to keep to yourself until God says, go. I think Joseph was genuine. I think God gave him a gift in being able to dream big dreams. But perhaps his youth caused him to open his mouth just a little too soon. You know, even Jesus, the Bible tells us in Luke 2:52, even Jesus grew in wisdom and stature in favor with God and with man. Now, why is that verse in there if it wasn't possible for even Jesus, the Son of God but Son of Man, that in his humanity, he also had to mature and grow in favor with God and man. So certainly, if we can read that about Jesus, that can be true about all of us as well. While Joseph's initial reaction to these dreams as a teenager may have been immature, it does seem that he has something special in the area of leadership right from the very beginning. It seems like every situation he found himself in, he led. And a lot of the situations that he found himself in were not positive. We may be able to look at this from the outside in, and maybe it doesn't kind of hit us as hard, but if you imagine yourself going through what Joseph went through, you may think that it'd be awfully hard to stay positive about some of the situations that he went through. But thank God Joseph was able to do this because God had a call upon his life. He wasn't just a leader, but really the best kind of leader, and that is a servant leader. Willing to serve even in difficult situations and committed to doing what is right even if others around you are doing what is wrong. Joseph has often been called a type of Christ. What does that mean? Well, it's just a theological term that says there's a pattern in Joseph that we see in Christ. And there are many types of Christ that we see in the Old Testament. And they're usually people, but not always. The pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud that guided the Israelites through the wilderness is called a type of Christ because it was the guiding through the wilderness. But Joseph is often called a type of Christ. Think about it. There's a lot of foreshadowing here, and there's a lot of parallels in the life of Joseph that apply to the life of Jesus. He was rejected by his own people. He was betrayed for silver. He was falsely accused. He suffered for doing what was right. Joseph was a savior, a deliverer of his own people. Jesus was the savior and deliverer of the world. And Joseph also modeled forgiveness. So let's just tell the story, hitting on the high spots. He was sold into slavery by his brothers. We already talked about some of the things that he said. They weren't too thrilled with it. Maybe they were a little jealous of the love that Jacob showed for him. Then he comes off and starts bragging about these dreams that he had, and they just wanted rid of him. So they sold him into slavery, and they told their father Jacob that a wild animal had killed him. In Egypt, in slavery, Joseph was elevated as a servant of Potiphar, who was the captain of the guard for Pharaoh. This is the first example we have that even in captivity, even in a place where he didn't want to be, even where he didn't have control of his own life, he rose to a position of authority. And eventually, Potiphar put just about everything under his control. Everything that Joseph does prospers by God's favor. Well, Potiphar's wife, if you remember that story, Joseph must have been one good-looking dude because Potiphar's wife kept asking him to come and be with her. Don't tell anybody. It'll be our little secret. Joseph said, no way. He said, listen, your husband has put me in charge of everything. And the only thing that I do not have access to is you. And I'm not going to do what you want me to do. Well, he gets put in prison because he was falsely accused by Potiphar's wife. And she said, he tried to rape me, which of course was the complete opposite of what had happened. And Potiphar was furious, and he threw Joseph in prison. And while he was in prison, everything he does prospers by God's favor. The warden soon put Joseph in charge of the prison. The dreamer then became an interpreter of dreams. People would come to him in the prison. The baker and the cupbearer who were in prison started coming to him with dreams, and Joseph gave the interpretation. And all along the line, Joseph gives God the glory for this ability. He's quick to say, I can't do anything, but God working through me I'm able to interpret these dreams only because of God. So the baker and the cupbearer had dreams. They both came true. Didn't turn out so good for the baker. He was impaled on a pole. Not a good way to go. And the cupbearer was restored to his position. And before the cupbearer went before the king, Joseph said, hey, keep me in mind, will you? Will you put in a good word for me once you see Pharaoh? Well, that didn't happen. And 2 years passed. Joseph is still in prison. The cupbearer has his old job back. And I'm sure Joseph had to have those kind of days where he thought, am I ever going to get out of here? Listen, I'm trying to do what's right. Well, his chance finally came. Pharaoh had a dream that he couldn't understand, and they couldn't figure out who could give him the answer to this. All of a sudden, the cupbearer went, "Ah, I know a guy. His name is Joseph, and he's a Hebrew, and he's in prison." So the king brings him out, and Pharaoh tells him his dream, two-part dream. Had 7 healthy cows followed by 7 shriveled up cows. And the scrawny ones ate the healthy ones. And then he had another dream. There were 7 heads of grain on a single stalk, and then there were 7 shriveled heads of grain, and the shriveled ones ate the healthy ones up. And Joseph gave the interpretation of that dream, and he said, there's 7 years of plenty coming, and then there are 7 years of famine. And Pharaoh was so overwhelmed and so appreciative of this that Joseph was appointed governor of Egypt. He was now number 2 in charge of all of Egypt. Not a native-born Egyptian, not even a free person, but someone who had been in prison, a Hebrew who were despised by the Egyptians, especially the shepherds. And here is Joseph now, second in command in all of Egypt. Now, by this time, Joseph's 30 years old. Think about this. 13 years from the day that he was sold into slavery. 13 years. He had these dreams. They were real to him. He told his brothers and his father about these dreams. He knew that he was destined for leadership, but yet it took 13 years for this to come to pass. 13 years. Have you been waiting for a while to see what God is going to use you in? Do you think sometimes, Lord, when am I ever going to see the fruition of this dream that you've given me? Well, he successfully led Egypt through the famine that God had warned Pharaoh about. Which brings up something else. Who says that God doesn't speak to those who don't claim to follow him? He obviously does. Read the Old Testament. Think of Pharaoh, think of Nebuchadnezzar, think of Cyrus. And these people, they were not followers of the one true God, but God spoke to them. Why does he speak to them? Because sometimes God shows favor to ungodly people for the sake of those whom they have the ability to bless. I mentioned that last week. If you're under the authority of someone who is not a follower of God and not a follower of Jesus, it's still to your best, to your benefit to honor them. Because many times they are able in turn to bless others. And many times your actions and reactions under even ungodly leadership will eventually lead them to Christ. So, Egypt became a land of plenty when the rest of the world was experiencing a time of lack. And God used Joseph not only to bless the inhabitants of Egypt, but also surrounding peoples as well, including Jacob's own family. Oh, it's coming full circle now, isn't it? You know, and I never want to assume that everybody knows this story. If you grew up in church, you've heard this story, but maybe you didn't, and maybe this is new to you. This is not the entire story. I encourage you to go in and read chapter 37 of Genesis to the end of the book, chapter 50. It's not that long of a read. Take you less time than it takes to watch your favorite TV show, and you'll get the full impact of the story. 2 key verses that show the character of Joseph when he had the opportunity to either bless or curse his brothers. He's in a position of leadership. He's in a position to help his family. And he does help his family. But he had a choice to make. He could have easily said, after what you did to me, I'm not giving you one bit of help. But there's 2 verses here that show the character and nature of Joseph, even after what he had been through for the past 13 years. And it's in Genesis 45. It's verse 5 and it's verse 8. Verse 5 says, "But don't be upset and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives." And then verse 8, So it was God who sent me here, not you. And he is the one who made me an advisor to Pharaoh, the manager of his entire palace, and the governor of all Egypt. How many times do you think that God had put you someplace that you didn't understand, that God allowed you to go through some things that didn't make sense? Maybe that God allowed you to be in a position where nobody else seemed to understand what it was he was asking you to do, but it was for a purpose that you didn't see at the time. Joseph was smart enough to realize it, and when he was standing face to face with his brothers, and he finally came to a point where he told them who he was, he said, do not worry, do not be hard on yourself, because God is the one that sent me here, not you. I mean, there's so much in that. There's forgiveness. There's patience. There's an understanding of the bigger picture that Joseph is showing here today. And it's also a parallel to Jesus. Think about it. Wouldn't Jesus say the same thing to you? It's not you that caused me to come to this earth and live a sinless life and die a painful death. It was God who sent me here. It was God's love that sent me here to this earth for you. There are details to this story that I'll leave to your careful study, but for purposes today, on the subject of servant leadership, let's take a look at some of Joseph's circumstances and the way that he responded to them. I think we'll find some good inspiration and direction for us today if we find ourselves in similar circumstances. The first thing is this: Joseph was a victim of jealousy. There was a misunderstanding of his gifting, and that happens all the time. You know, I said one time, somebody got offended, which, you know, that happens. Not my intention. When I talk about prophets, prophets are usually kind of weird. And if you look through Scripture, and the prophets were a little different. Usually people who are used in the prophetic don't value the same things that the rest of us do. Their priorities are totally different. And sometimes they're misunderstood. I think Joseph certainly was misunderstood. God had his hand on him from a very young age. Now, granted, we have to take into account maybe Joseph's youthful attitude and some poor choices in what he shared and when he shared it. But you got to admit, God had his hand on Joe from the very beginning. He was his father's favorite, born of Rachel, whom he deeply loved, had a special robe, right, a coat of many colors. You see some of the other brothers saying, I didn't get a fancy robe. How comes I don't have a fancy robe? Wow. Boy wonder here gets a fancy robe. How about us today? Favor from God often causes jealousy of men and women. There's no explaining favor from God. But God has his reasons. You probably don't know anybody like this, but did you know there are some people who are never happy? I know there's no one here like that, but have you ever met somebody, maybe in some other church? They're just never happy. And when someone succeeds or someone is given a position, they're usually the first to stand up and complain about it. Always play the victim card, no matter how blessed they are. Think that being the leader is a cushy job. Do you aspire to lead? Is God calling you to lead? Then let me encourage you to learn to serve and be content with doing the right thing, even if it leads to jealousy on the part of others. The second thing about Joseph we can look at today is that his obedience cost him his freedom. He got in a position where he was out of control. He knew what God had called him to. He tried to do the right thing, and yet his freedom was taken from him. There were things and circumstances in his life that were just out of his control. He was sold into slavery. He was put into prison. He was falsely accused. That last one is part of the package, friends. If God is calling you to something great, if God has given you a big dream, being falsely accused is all part of the package. You might as well just get over it. It's going to happen. Honored God. He honored God in spite of his circumstances. So for us today, what can we gain from this? Servant leadership may cause the loss of some personal freedom. And we got to learn to be okay with that. You may not always get to tell your story. When you're reaching out to especially those who are lost, in need of a Savior, we can't expect them to respond like we would to a certain situation. And there's some loss in freedom in that, like we don't always get to tell our story. You got to be okay with that. You got to be okay with maybe not always getting to make a defense. There was a, yesterday I was at Giant, and I got something, and I was waiting to get in my car, and there was a lady loading some groceries into the passenger side of her car while I was waiting to get in the driver's side of mine. So I just stood there and I waited. And there was somebody else in the car, and this lady was putting stuff in, and she was griping and complaining, and effing this, and just everything under the sun. And she looked like a nice old grandmother. And she was just finding fault with everything. And I just stood there and waited. And finally, she looked at me and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, dear. Did you want to get in here?" I said, "No, it's fine. I'll wait." No, you go ahead. But I thought, here's something that's hard sometimes. When God has given you a call, it's likely that it wouldn't have gone over very well if I'd have gotten all upset and all offended by what she said. Why would I expect someone who's not following Jesus to act like someone who's following Jesus? So we get ourselves in situations, and you're going to be around people who don't go to church, maybe who've never been there and don't know, quote, how to act. But really, isn't that good? Isn't that good? We don't want people putting on airs. But you know what? There's some freedom that we lose in that. Sometimes you just got to be quiet and maybe look for an opportunity. Sometimes maybe they've had reactions by church people that have made them angrier. We don't know. You trust God. There are times that we kind of lose our freedom to talk back. And it's something that we have to learn to be okay with at times. There are things that may be okay for somebody else that aren't okay for you. And they may not be sinful things. But for you, it just may not be something that you can do. And there's some loss in freedom with that. Here's the third thing that Joseph experienced. He was faithful in high position. He had times of favor in his life, right? He was elevated to serve in very responsible positions. He was given a great deal of freedom to do as he chose, but he didn't allow his freedom to compromise his character. When things are going well and there's plenty of money in the bank and you got lots of friends and you got a great job and everything's bang, 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 we can get a little full of ourselves. But that didn't happen to Joseph. He recognized the responsibility that he was in. He didn't say, "Finally, I've made it to the top. Now I can do what I want." No, he was responsible. He was faithful even in the high position. After being put in a place of reward and influence, Joseph didn't abuse this place of honor. So for us today, how can we learn from that? With favor and responsibility comes increased accountability. When God puts you in leadership, when God shows his favor toward you, when God opens up doors of opportunity for you to minister for him, there will be a temptation that comes from the enemy to think that somehow you deserved it and that somehow, boy, everybody just ought to fall at their feet in front of you. No, we can't do it. With favor and responsibility comes increased accountability. The Word of God says this is true, especially about those who teach the Word will be held to a higher standard, that even not many should seek to teach simply because of that. There is a higher accountability. Serving others has some benefits. People say some nice things about you. Watch how you receive that. Joseph did. He was careful to give God the glory. And the fourth thing here is Joseph did the right thing even when no one was looking. Boy, that's the definition of character. Doing the right thing when no one is watching. Doing the right thing when you could get away with doing the wrong thing. Potiphar's wife was probably not going to tell anyone, at least right away, if Joseph had agreed to what she wanted to do, if he would have given in to her advances. But what was Joseph's response? Genesis 39:9. He said to her, "No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God." He understood that his authority was subject to somebody else. First of all, Potiphar, but most importantly, God. He was responsible to God. Ultimately, the greatest sin, if he would have yielded to that temptation, would be against God. So what does that say to us today? Servant leadership requires great character, best defined by doing the right thing, even when no one can see. The fifth thing that we get from Joseph today is that he was unjustly punished. In chapter 40:15, when he's talking to the cupbearer, he said, "Listen, remember me when you get before Pharaoh, because I've been in this prison and I did nothing wrong." He was unjustly punished. He said, "Look, I'm in this prison because I chose to do the right thing." There are times that you will be punished or looked down upon for doing the right thing. You got friends or family who think that what you do in here is just a waste of time? Did you have people that you work with that say, "Oh, that's right, he would never do that, he's a Christian," and they look down upon you? Well, Joseph was punished greatly because of doing the right thing. Now, let's understand something. Just because Joseph made the best of some bad circumstances doesn't mean he wanted to stay there. There's nothing holy about staying in a bad circumstance when you have the freedom to leave. Paul wrote that in 1 Corinthians 7:11, when he said, 7:21, when he said, "Are you a slave? Don't let that worry you, but if you get a chance to be free, take it." Yes, I won't. Yeah, I'll just take a little trip. Punishing yourself or beating yourself up or claiming some kind of glory from your bad situation is not holy. It does not make you holy. It usually means that you're self-idolizing yourself. Look at me, look at what I've been through. So, I mean, you don't seek to be unjustly punished, but it will happen. And when it does happen, the way you respond to it is the best way. If Joseph was trying to gain that, like, "Oh, look at me," he would not have agreed to be released from prison, right? So we don't want to be like that. However, if you're in a position when you're unjustly punished, man, consider Jesus, will you? Consider Jesus. There's no one who's ever lived who has been more unjustly punished than Jesus. And it wasn't just people talking down to him. It wasn't just people insulting him. It wasn't people blaspheming him. It was more than that. That was enough, right? But he was physically beaten, physically abused, and he was killed by one of the worst methods of execution ever devised by men, and that is crucifixion. But he did it for you, and he did it for me. Why? Because the one who knew no sin had to pay sin's penalty of death so that those of us who were born in sin could be free. So if you think that you're unjustly punished or somehow that the world is against you, I want you to think today of Jesus and consider him. Even though punished for something he didn't do, he did not use that as an excuse to reject God. He had every opportunity, folks. He went willingly to the cross. He had every opportunity to say no. He had to have that free will to do so, or else he would not have been sufficient sacrifice for our sin. Consider Jesus. Sometimes those who serve receive the highest criticism, generally by those who do nothing. If you don't believe me, go on social media. You know, I get a little weary. I know that there are high-profile preachers who maybe don't do things the right way. But I get a little weary of everybody criticizing everybody who they know nothing about. So there has to be a reason for that. I find myself mentioning certain authors around certain people just to get a rise. I feel that's something Jesus would have done. I do. You look at how he dealt with the religious leaders and those who felt they were righteous. So the next time someone knocks somebody down that they know nothing about, I encourage you to say, do you know them? Yeah. Don't let the critics keep you from serving. You're not impressing them. Number 6 that Joseph went through that we can learn from today, he was made to wait. 13 years. 13 years. But while waiting, what did he do? Did he sit around and complain? Did he say, I can't believe I have to wait? Did he say, boy, once God answers these and sets things in motion, then I'm really going to serve him? No, he served while he waited. He served while he waited. They who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. Think of that as a waiter, not waiting like begrudging, like, oh no, when's this ever going to happen? Think about that. Those who wait upon the Lord. Wait upon the Lord. Serve the Lord. And he served his captors. Think about it. Joseph served his captors. He didn't do just enough either. His diligence caused his captors to thrive. He went over and above. Folks, there's something about doing something for the Lord and do it well. Do it with everything you have. There's a difference between being professional about something and just honoring God with it, right? Do what you do with everything that you have, that you want to honor God in everything that you do. Joseph did this, and he wasn't free. In his imprisonment, he served above and beyond. And that also earned him a place of honor and responsibility. You know, we're so used to instant everything. How do I do, like I was telling somebody the other day, when I was on the road in ministry, somebody would say, how do I get involved in music ministry? Well, what are you doing now? Well, nothing. You go to church? Yeah. Can you play your instrument or sing in church? Well, I'm waiting because I think I'm really called. Get away from me. What are you doing? What are you doing toward what it is you think God's called you to do? You think he's just going to drop everything out of the sky? If he's called you to do it, do what you have to do. Moses had to wait until he was 80 years old until he stepped into a role that God had for him, the role of a lifetime, the role he was born for. We're going to talk about Moses next Sunday. Now, granted, a lot of those years that he had to wait were because of him. Right? He wasn't willing to let go of maybe God's way is different than mine. You know, he kind of tried to do it his way. He saw his position, I'm convinced. I'm preaching next week's message. He saw his position. He saw where he was at, certainly. Here he was, and he was preserved out of certain death, and he was raised by Pharaoh's daughter. And now he's in a position of leadership, and I think he thought, okay, now they're going to have to listen to me. It didn't work. It cost him 40 years wandering in the desert. But at 80 years old, he finally figured it out. Some of us take longer than others, right? He finally figured it out. Oh, wait, it's God's way and not mine. So for us today, what can we take from this? Bloom where you're planted. Bloom. Do everything that you can possibly do. Serve where you're planted. Serve where you're at. Be the best you can be for the glory of God, for the benefit of others. There's no reason to wait. I tell people all the time when they're trying to work towards something, what's something you can do today toward that goal? There's always something you can do. Always. Never fails. Every single time. If you really, really want it and you really think God is calling you, then identify something you can start with today. And don't tell me there's nothing, because that's a lie. Now, if it's just something you want to do, that maybe there's not a call, well, then maybe there's room to talk about it. What can you do today to follow God's calling for you? Today I can call my son and say, you need to come fix this dimmer. He fixed it once, but anyway. Here's the seventh thing. He refused the opportunity for revenge. Oh, man. That's hard for some people. A lot of times when people are being oppressed by somebody and they say, just wait until I get free, they're going to get theirs. Joseph didn't do that. He refused that opportunity for revenge. Now, I got to say, when his brothers came and they didn't know who he was, he played with their minds a little bit. He kind of wanted to set them up to test their honesty. You know, he put their money back in their bags of grain. He put his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. But he did them no harm. And eventually he was able to bless his brothers and his father more than they ever could have imagined. Pharaoh himself gave them the best of the land of Egypt to live in. We're encouraged in the New Testament, Romans 12:14, to bless those who persecute you. Don't curse them. Pray that God will bless them. This is life-changing, folks. Pray for those who persecute you. Pray for those who are keeping you back. Pray for those who are that thorn in your side. I know you're all spiritual and you don't know anybody like that, but I do. I'm not as spiritual as you are. There are some people that can do that to you, but we're called to bless them and not curse. That need to get even, it comes from our flesh. Vengeance is mine. That isn't ours to say, right? That's the Lord. They'll get theirs, or I'll show them. Well, now your motivations have totally been cheapened from honoring God to showing somebody else. That's not the way to live. So for us today, Joseph gives us a great example here in returning blessing for curse. It puts like a wrench in the gears of generational hate. Right? It rewrites the future when you choose to bless and not curse. And it truly is an example of what Christ did for us. It stops the normal progression of offense. Got to get over being offended, folks. Got to get over being offended. Thank you. And here's the last thing that I want to talk about today, what Joseph did and we can learn from. He left a godly legacy. Joseph's two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, divided Joseph's portion of the promise that was given to Abraham, passed down through Isaac and Jacob. We know that Levi received no land, but the tribe of Levi was responsible for the administration of the tabernacle, eventually the temple, and 6 cities of refuge. But all of the other sons of Jacob received the land allotment, and Joseph's was divided between his sons. He left a legacy that lived beyond him. He saw 3 generations of descendants from his son Ephraim. He saw 2 generations from Manasseh, and we're still telling Joseph's story today. Wow, can you imagine if Joseph would have had a different attitude, if he would not have exemplified what it means to be a godly leader? We wouldn't be talking about him today. we wouldn't be telling a story. Or if we did tell a story, it would certainly not be an encouraging story. It would be a story that says, don't be like this, right? So he left a godly legacy. For us today, please don't let the story end with you. Don't let it end with you. The dream that you dream, you may never see it come to fruition. How about Abraham? How about Isaac? And even Jacob did not see the coming into the land, the promised land of Canaan, but yet his sons did. Let your dream live longer than you. Be okay with that. Be okay with not seeing everything come to pass. Just do what God is telling you to do, and you are contributing to those who come along after you. Cultivate a story that outlives you. Look down the road at what you might set to motion today that may yield kingdom increase long after you're gone. It's your decision. What will you do with what God has given to you? Team, would you come back? We're going to do one more song. What will you do with what God has given to you? Has he given you favor? Has he given you freedom? Has he given you influence? Has he given you a dream? Has he given you a dream that is so wild that you don't even think you could tell anybody about it? Has he given you something deep down inside that you just can't shake? You see no humanly way possible that any of this is going to happen. Will you go with it? What will you do when you face resistance and obstacles? If people are jealous of you, or you have loss of personal freedom and you're tempted, or there's unjust accusation or punishment, when you're made to wait, when you think you're ready, know this: you will not receive commendation in your lifetime. What would that do if you knew you were never going to get credit? Would you still work as hard? Oh, I think that's the attitude Joseph had. I think that's the attitude that we're all supposed to have. It should not be about getting credit. It should be about glorifying God. This is something that we have to do some business with today. I do believe that every single person here has a calling from God. Some are public, some are not. But everybody here, if you pursue God, what do you want me to do with my life? How can I start today? Settle the fact that no one may know that you're the one that is working and praying and striving for this. Be okay with that. Be okay with the critics. Be okay with not getting the credit. How will you handle success? Joseph achieved position, favor, even while he was in prison. He handled it with great humility. He didn't let it change his attitude. It did not change his humility before God. Great example. Aren't you glad we have record of these examples? Aren't you glad that we see in Jesus someone who came to this earth that not only we could be forgiven, but that we could be made more like him? Christian means little Jesus. It means, if you're a Christian, it means you live like Jesus. You act like Jesus. You react like Jesus. You go through tribulation and struggle like Jesus. This is the goal, and it's only made possible by the refining power of the Holy Spirit as we allow him more access to our lives, more access to our minds, more access to our schedule and our calendar and our priorities and our money and our time. You're all servants of God. You're all servants. Be godly servants. When God gives you positions of authority in whatever area that is, be a godly servant. Be a servant leader like Joseph. And I think that starts certainly with the cry to God that says, I can't do this. I can't. Have you ever said, I can't, right? There's a liberating words, friends. I can't. I can't. When we first come to Jesus and ask him to save us, we have to say, I can't. When we feel a call to live for him and we say, I can't. When he tells us to love the unlovable and we say, I can't. You know, that's a great admission that we need his help. We need him. But he's perfectly willing. He's ready and he's able how will you reply to him? Our prayer is, Lord, draw me nearer. Draw me nearer to the cross where Jesus died. Draw me nearer to your precious bleeding side, because we need him every hour of every day if we're going to be the servants and the servant leaders that he's calling us to be.